Hello, North Shore Community School. I'm Mark Gordon from Sea Change Expeditions, and we're really sorry that we couldn't be with you guys this year, but we really wanted to bring you this presentation on invasives virtually. And we are actually on our boat right now, and so you're sort of out there sailing with us. And for the past, 17 years, really, we've been sailing around the lake talking to different scientists and visiting with lifelong residents and really learning a lot about the lake and a lot about climate change and a lot about invasive species. And so that's kind of what we want to talk to you um, about today. Here's Lake Superior, obviously, and I just want to show you where we are. We're broadcasting right from a little harbor right here. So we started out down in Knife River and we sailed up to Silver Bay, and then we sailed up to a place called Taconite Harbor. And that's where we're broadcasting right from now. And we're going to be sailing down here to the Apostles, probably back to Silver Bay, and eventually back to Knife River, being gone about 3 weeks or so. But anyway, let's talk about invasive species. And first of all, what's the definition of an invasive species? Well, the definition is any organism that is non-native that comes in to your area and disrupts the ecology or the food chain of your natural area. So think of it this way. If you woke up tomorrow morning and you had a herd of hippopotamuses sitting out in your garden eating your whole garden, you could say that you now have the hippopotamus as an invasive species coming in and disrupting your food chain. And on Lake Superior, there are about 80 invasive species that have come into the lake over the last 150 years or so. And the Great Lakes as a whole has about 180 invasive species. So we're really doing a lot better than the lower Great Lakes. In fact, the lower Great Lakes, they're having an invasive nightmare going on right now. And the only thing that's keeping all those extra invasives out of Lake Superior is the fact that it's clean, cold, and clear still. And that's why we really want to try to keep it that way. But there are some that are really pretty serious invasives in the lake, and I'm going to talk about 3 of them. And the first one, some of you may be able to recognize this one, but it's called the sea lamprey. And the sea lamprey has been in the Great Lakes for quite a long time, actually, like since 1921 was the first one they found in Lake Erie, and it slowly marched its way through the lakes and eventually ended up in Lake Superior. In fact, in 1940s, 1950s, it really became a huge problem for the fishing industry throughout the Great Lakes, but Lake Superior as well, and practically wiped out the lake trout population, almost became extinct in Lake Superior, because what they do is they're this eel-like creature, and they got quite a mouth on them. I don't think I'd want one of them things to latch on to my leg, but they'll latch on and literally suck the life right out of a fish. And they're very prolific, and so which means they reproduce a lot, and there's a lot of them out there, and the fish really have no defense against them. And so it took years to figure out how can we deal with these sea lamprey, how can we get rid of them? And finally they came up with this solution. It's called lampricide. It's actually a chemical that they put into the water where the lamprey spawn, and they spawn up in these little creeks and rivers that flow into the lake. And so right when they're real little babies, they actually spend the first 3 years of their lives, and they're just these little worm things that kind of dig down into the mud, and at night they'll stick their heads out and feed on plankton and stuff like that in the water. And so if you put the lampricide in the water, and it's a poison that kills the lamprey, but it doesn't affect any of the other fish. And so they found a way to start doing this, and it was most effective during the spawning season in the spring. And so there was about a 2-week period or so every spring where they could apply this lampricide into the known spawning areas of the lamprey, and then that would kill them. And so they got them under control. Everything was good. I mean, there were still some out there, and you'd see them every once in a while, but nothing like it used to be. And they considered it under control. But now lately, because Lake Superior is warming, connected to climate change, we're seeing more and more of these sea lamprey kind of making a comeback. And one of the reasons is because the water is warming, the sea lamprey will spawn. Their spawning period has become longer because they kind of spawn only during a certain temperature of the water. And because they have a longer spawning period, that means that they have to use more lampricide and spend more resources trying to control the sea lamprey. And the sea lamprey are starting to kind of get a little bit ahead of the game now. And so they're worried about that. And because they won't be able to keep up as the water temperature continues to warm in the streams and in the lake. So that was one that they had under control, and now it's making kind of a comeback. Another one I want to show you is the spiny water flea. And some of you who fish on Lake Superior or even the inland lakes, or in the inland lakes as well, it's a thing called the spiny water flea. And there are just these little, maybe an inch long, little, very small, you can barely see them. They're very sort of transparent too. You can tell because you can see like their big eyeball. That's that dark thing. And anyway, when you're trolling, especially around the mouths of rivers and stuff, you'll see all of a sudden you'll get this glooby globby thing on your fishing line, and those are spiny water flea. And the thing is, the reason anglers don't like them is because they get all gooped up on your line, and all of a sudden you catch a fish and you start reeling it in, and then this goopy stuff gets into the first eyelet of your fishing pole, and your line can break, and then you lose the fish. And so that's a bummer for anglers. And if that was the only issue, we could probably live with the spiny water flea if you're going to lose a few fish when you're out fishing. But the thing is, it goes much deeper than that. And because, again, the spiny water flea, they come in and they reproduce so much, they just become thick in areas. And they feed on the same thing that a lot of the other organisms of the lower part of the food chain feed on, like zooplankton and phytoplankton. And so there's so many of them, they start to eat up all of those planktons, and there isn't enough for the other fish and other small organisms. And then that becomes a problem for the rest of the food chain. And that's really what the big thing is. And now you might think, well, heck, there's so many of them, why don't the fish just eat them instead? And some bigger fish, like say a lake trout, they could eat the spiny water flea, but they'd have to eat so many of them because they're so small, it's just not practical. And they couldn't eat all of the spiny water flea to keep them under control. And then your smaller, like minnow type fish, they might be able to eat them, but actually they're called spiny water flea for a reason. And that is, you can see these little spines right here on the tail. Well, a little minnow will gobble up one of these things, and those spines will get caught in their throat, and they'll like spit it out, and they don't like it. So the smaller fish can't eat them, and so they just overpopulate. And there's some inland lakes that these are so thick you can just like scoop bucket loads of them out of the lake. And we've been out trying to catch some ourselves. I want to just show you a little video here on how we would do that. Oops. Let's see here if I can get this to play. Whoops. Oh, here we go. The spiny water flea has been in the lake now for quite a number of years, and it's just this little tiny little guy that has been wreaking havoc with the lower part of the food chain. And a lot of times fishermen get them caught up in their fishing line. So we're going to actually go trolling for spiny water flea right now. And the way we do that is we just drag a big loop in the water. So I'm going to just drop this in, and we'll let it go out. reel it in and just see if what we have. Oops. So luckily on that one, we didn't find many because we were about 10 miles offshore, and most of them you're going to find a little bit closer in, but we wanted to kind of test our method there. But they are a big problem, and anyone who's fished on Lake Superior, especially like even off of Knife River, I know that they're really bad at times off of Knife River. So if you're out there fishing, you'll probably see some of those. Now, the third one that I want to talk about are actually, there's two of them. It's the zebra mussel and the quagga mussel. And these are probably two of the biggest threats to Lake Superior right now because they really affect the water quality and the different structures in the water. And they're little mussels or little clam type things. They're about the size of a dime. And the zebra mussels tend to want to latch on to things like propellers, dock posts, and walls and stuff that are in the water. And the quagga mussels tend to latch on to things that are on the bottom. Here, these are little quagga mussels that someone dropped their sunglasses overboard, and the quagga mussels started to congregate on there. And you can see they just get thick all over the place on there. And so these are really bad for a number of different reasons. And one of the reasons is, as far as the ecology of the lake goes, they can multiply just like you wouldn't believe. Like you can see one or two one year, and you go back and there could be tens of thousands of them in the same place the next year. And they're filter feeders. And so what they do is they filter the water that they're in, and they filter out the plankton in the water, and that's what they eat. And so as they're filtering that plankton out, they're also cleaning the water. You might think that would be good, but really we need to have that plankton in the water to supply food for the lower part of the food chain. And there's so many of these. In fact, Lake Michigan right now is having a huge problem with these, where hundreds of square miles underneath, especially the lower part of Lake Michigan, it's just a carpet of quagga mussels. Quagga mussels tend to be on the bottom of the lake, and the zebras tend to be on structures around the lake. And they've filtered so much of the plankton out of the water that Lake Michigan is now the cleanest or the clearest of the Great Lakes. It has the greatest water clarity. And you might think, wow, that's good, but it's really not, because that means all of the food and nutrients for the other fish is also being filtered right out of the lake. And so it's finding it harder and harder for the fish to survive. And with the quagga mussels, they are such good filter feeders that they feed out all these things in the toxins, that are in the water. There's a certain toxin that's in the water that will build up in these quagga mussels, and they'll sort of excrete that out into the water, and it ends up feeding this thing called an avian botulism, which is a bacteria that other bigger fish can get and then become very ill and actually die from. And so you'll have lots of bigger fish dying from this avian botulism that is produced by the quagga mussels. And so these are very, very bad for the lake. And the natural resource departments around the lakes are spending millions and millions of dollars trying to control these mussels. And they always thought that Lake Superior would be just too cold. It's too clean, too clear, too cold for these mussels to survive. And turns out, unfortunately, that's not the case. And so now they're starting to find some on the lake. And the way they get here generally is by two ways. By commercial shipping, where a ship from even some port in Japan or over in Europe might pick one of these up in their ballast water, or which is this big holding tanks of water that they have to help stabilize the boat when they're crossing the ocean, or even one stuck to the hull. And they get up into Lake Superior and drop off, and now they're here and there's nothing we can do about it. Other times, recreational boats will pick one up down in Lake Michigan, and then they'll come up to visit. They'll drive their boats either by land or in the water up into Lake Superior, and then they'll drop off, and then we'll have them that way. And that's actually how they think some of these mussels have gotten into Lake Superior. And so these red arrows here, these are spots where they've actually found infestations of zebra mussels. And an infestation would be not just one or two, but like 2,000 or 3,000 of them or more. And unfortunately, it's very sad for us that they now have found them out at Isle Royale, because we spend so much time sailing out at Isle Royale, and it's so pristine and beautiful out there. But on this end at Mott Island, one year the divers, because they know they're going to be a threat, annually the divers do dives around certain dock structures to see if they found any zebras. And so here on a place called Mott Island, they were diving around a dock and they found 30 of them a couple years ago. And so the divers quickly scrubbed them off, cleaned up the area, and they thought they got them all, but apparently they missed one or two, because the next fall they went out there to check, and there was over 3,000 zebra mussels just in this one little patch. And they thought, oh, it's too late. It was now, they just can't control them. So they're just going to start growing more and more out there. And so then they started to do a little research. Well, how did they get there to begin with? Turns out there was a boat from Chicago, a power boat, a big boat that came up just on a pleasure cruise up here. And they came in and they were carrying a few on their hull. They didn't know it, but they were carrying some on their hull, and they dropped off when they were visiting this part of the island. And now we have zebra mussels out there. And in the Apostles, this yellow one that's the only known quagga mussel infestation that they found, and that's in the Apostle Islands. And so they're really hoping that it doesn't spread. But a lot of times the way it goes is once you see a few of them like that, then there's just no stopping them. And especially in the Apostles, and this part of the lake, it's shallow enough. It's only 500-600 feet deep around here, and which is good habitat for quagga mussels. So we're really worried that we're going to get a bunch more that way. So again, the way these have come in is either by big shipping like this, or even just, recreational boats. And that's why when you go to a boat landing, you see all these signs about stopping aquatic hitchhikers and invasive species alert. And that's why you really, if you're someone who likes to fish around here and you have a boat with a trailer on it, that's why it's so important to spend the time before and after you put that boat in to really make sure you don't have any of these invasive species stuck on your boat somewhere, because the way it'll get from one lake to the other is by fisher people and pulling their boats from one lake to the other. So what we really want to do is work hard to keep Lake Superior clean, cold, and clear. And that is the whole reason that we're out here sailing around on the lake, talking to people and talking to school groups like you. I just want to say, North Shore, you guys are the best when it comes to this kind of stuff, because you're one of the few schools that really have a lot of this stuff in your curriculum. And we just think you guys are the best school around, and we're really always so happy to be able to come and talk to you guys. So anyway, wish you were here, and we'll see you next time.